Valcha, welcome back. This is video number 2 of Conversations with Nostradamus, book 2. We're on chapter 8, the Hadrian quatrains. So Nostradamus says that Paris is the city of the sun. And, I think the Sun King. Between World War I and World War II, Paris will be overrun, conquered, reestablish itself, and be reconquered. And that is basically what happened. He wanted to correct some mistakes, he told Dolores Cannon, in the identification of the great lawgiver, as he referred to Hadria. And this is where they had their big discussion about how people don't know their history or their mythology, because most people translate that quatrain to mean King Henry. And he said, what? I said, it's crazy. People don't know. So after the Antichrist, the Ethiopian royal line will be reestablished from a hidden line in the Middle East. That coincides with the research of Graham Hancock. Remember we did the sign and the seal? That corresponds with his search for the Ark of the Covenant and the history of Ethiopia that he uncovered. That blew my mind. So China is going to teach Africa how to use their land to feed large amounts of people with small amounts of land. There'll be shifts of power in Europe and shifts of power in North Africa and Asia, and this will put Europe's nose out of joint. Nostradamus says that there was a Hadrian the lawgiver and not King Henry, and so she tries, well, what about Hammurabi? And apparently she didn't know about Hadrian, the Roman emperor, which we'll get to. So he says in World War II, he describes blitzkrieg and uses that word. And he agrees that the tree that he described in his vision of the atomic bomb is a mushroom cloud. And he predicts that this bomb will cause DNA problems that will cut away life and also cut us off spiritually. England's royal house will fall to the Antichrist, and all of the males in the royal line will be killed or will get a disease from a bomb, germ warfare, that only kills men. And the women royals are all too old or too sterile to procreate that line. The English can choose to continue with the monarchy, but they must look afar to find somebody, and their choice will be surprising. And I couldn't help but think of the guy in Australia. Look this up. There's a guy challenging Charles that he's his illegitimate son. So, Nostradamus says that we already have top secret bioweapons that affect only one gender, because Dolores Cannon was like, come on. And he said, no, they only affect one gender. And it's a virus that can tell X from Y chromosomes. And it'll be dropped on England, but carried in the air to Europe, more limited in Europe. That a vaccine will be invented, but it will take time. Then he talks to her, he schools her on Hadrian. He was a Roman emperor in 117 AD. He was the first to codify law in Rome from many cultures that were there. You have to remember that, I need to remember that the Roman Empire was an interesting sort of entity. They would march into a place and take over and do whatever amount of murdering and pillaging and enslaving people. But when the dust settled, they would make these détentes with countries far away, tribes far away, which would amount to, okay, now we dub you part of our Roman Empire, and here's the deal. We'll have a governor here who will represent us. You can go about your business, but now you owe money to the empire because you're part of it. Don't worry, we work on infrastructure. We're the Romans. And they allowed freedom of religion. It's sort of a misconception that Romans killed every other religion and went after all the Christians, and those were isolated parts of time, particular emperors, limited in time, who had issues. But in general, they were very tolerant of other people's religions and often adopted them. In fact, the Roman military adopted the cult of Mithras, which I believe came from Persia. I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've thought of it. I'm distracting myself. So he said that Hadrian believed in equity and worked out negotiations, so that took all these various laws from all over the place and codified them into one fair law for everybody. Now we're on chapter 9, the horoscopes. So they attempt to do the Antichrist's chart, and he warns them that this information I'm giving you is actually a combination of the Antichrist's natal chart and interaction with planets at the time that he rose to power. So there's sort of layers to it. I wrote it down because I wanted to talk to Denise about it. And I'll give you a little taste of what it sounds like. The sun will be in a place of fire. Mercury is on balance of scales. Neptune is in his seat of power in the sea. Pluto is in a place of mystery. We won't go into it. I really don't understand anything about astrology. And he gets really detailed. He says the Antichrist's horoscope is one of extremes. He has magnetism over others, but it's a negative magnetism. And it contributes to his swift rise to power and his sudden fall. He talks about planets that have not been identified by his time period, but were known to the ancients, and they're known to us. He said there's been a lot of ancient knowledge that's been forgotten when Atlantis fell, and that they were far more advanced than we are now. He said that the Antichrist, let's see, I missed something here. At the time that he gave this particular information in the late 80s was about 17. And there's a couple of different birth dates given for him. I looked up one and thought, oh, well, it's got to be Prince Hussein of Jordan. But it's very confusing. I would recommend, if you're into astrology, get the book and try to figure it out. It's a real challenge. He says that the Antichrist is born in a time when the planets are aligned for the birth of a very demonic person, and he had a traumatic adolescence. And he says that he feels that there's a karmic debt that the Antichrist has, and he's working out his karma, and Nostradamus says that it's his responsibility in light of that. It's his karma to get this information out for people. So he talks about the Antichrist is going to rise during a grand trine, and I don't know what that is, and they narrowed some down to certain dates, and they speculate about that. He said the present pope will be assassinated, the next pope will be assassinated, but it'll be covered up, he'll be poisoned. The final pope will be under the Antichrist's control, he'll be a tool. And he said he will have the present pope will be born in April of 1932. I didn't look it up. Then he talks about Ogmios, who's the nemesis of the Antichrist. He's like a Celtic Hercules. And he was born in 1952 from Central Europe. And he describes him as a very simple person of the people. Chapter 10, the tapestry room. Now, this was a little interesting tidbit. So, Brenda was... Her regression subject was strapped for cash and had to quit school to go to work. And the only work she could get was in a chicken processing plant, and she could not do anything but work and sleep. She was exhausted. It was physically hard on her joints. So Cannon had set a tight timetable for finishing the book, and now that was getting all screwed up. John Feely, the astrologer, said that there was something not right with the Antichrist's horoscope and his timeline. And he had to leave in 2 months. He'd be going away, and he was really anxious to finish the project. So he's putting pressure on Cannon. So Cannon decided to just complete her first book, to relax about it, just get the first book out there and worry about the rest of it later. And John came to her one day and said, why didn't we think of this before? Why don't you put me in a trance? Let's see if I can talk to Nostradamus. I understand astrology a lot, and Brenda doesn't understand it at all. So she agreed to try, and he actually was a good meditative subject because he meditated all the time, and she was able to get him into a trance very easily. So he describes walking along a hall studded with gems to a huge library full of books and scrolls. The walls are made of gold and silver with gems in them that reflect the light to create a reading light. He says she said this has been described by other people that she's put under. She was shocked. There's a guardian of the library who is a light being. John sees groups of people studying, he finds out they're preparing for their earth school. That's what they call this place. They have a sense of purpose and serenity. He says everything glimmers. They're wearing beautiful robes that are transparent, but they're full of color because their auras shine through. So you see only the colors. The guardians tell John there's a place there where you can look back in time, viewing rooms where you can actually look back in time. So the guardian sends them to the tapestry room, which John says is actually like an assault to the senses in a good way, that it smells beautiful and it looks beautiful. It has a very tall, he goes into a lengthy description of it, but tall ceilings that meet at a point and high windows for light and chandeliers like Aladdin's lamps, and the floors and walls are all marble. There's a huge tapestry in this room of metallic threads, and it breathes like it's alive. Each thread represents a life that's ever happened. He says it's very complicated. It goes on for miles. And he can look at it and see any event that's happened in the past. And he can see people living right now and every life ever lived. And he can look at where their souls are going. You're not allowed to, but you could. And each life is interwoven, and it shows the oneness of humanity in a visual way. He's told not to look at lives deeply because the knowledge could be detrimental to their development. You shouldn't know these things. John says it runs for miles, but there's a point past which he's not allowed to go. He just physically can't go there. And it has to do with how spiritually evolved you are. Only very evolved souls can go past that point. Only spiritually evolved souls do, and the strings are all diameters. Some of them are filaments, some of them are cables. They're all different colors and metallics, and they represent the spiritual energy of all the different souls. One of the teachers is pointing out to this group of souls lessons in past lives that's going to help them with their future lives. And it turns out this is the Akashic Records is what this is. And some are in books for less advanced souls. Need to focus. Like a child going to a kid's book instead of to a college library is how they describe it. The tapestry goes to other dimensions, and it ends in godhood. I don't even know what that means, really. The guide says that more people than you would think travel on the astral plane when they're dreaming, when they're asleep, and that artists will often come to the astral plane to learn about their art and learn about the tapestry and everything. It influences their art, and I immediately thought of Klimt's art. It has sort of a golden quality to it. Others come while they're meditating or in a state of hypnosis. And while you're alive, this comes up in the conversation. The guide says, yes, I know you're still alive. I know that you're in a trance. I know that you're not a soul that's here to learn to move on. And they said, well, how did you know that? He says, well, you're still connected to your silver thread. You have a thread behind you that connects you to life. It's your soul, to your body, which people have commented about in our near-death experience videos. he says he has had to ask some people to leave. Once they had a really weird experience with a man he had dementia, and when he slept he would astral travel, but he was still not in his right mind, and he came to the tapestry and tried to pull out all the threads randomly, and they had to sedate him in real life. They had to arrange a situation where he was sedated in real life so that he wouldn't do that again and travel again. He says nobody's asked to leave unless they try to deface the tapestry. Rare things happen. He said sometimes things will happen in this room that you wouldn't expect. For example, when the atom bomb was dropped in Japan, so many people died suddenly that their souls actually sprang out of the tapestry, and boom, there they were standing there. It's all very hard to imagine. People would not be allowed into the room if they had negative emotions. The energy simply wouldn't allow them in. Chapter 11, the golden thread of Nostradamus. So they were asked if they could find and follow Nostradamus' thread. John followed it into a room, and as he followed it, it's like he went into the ability to communicate with Nostradamus again, and he sees him sitting at a table with a quill, and Nostradamus looks up and says, "Oh, you're the astrologer." John says that Nostradamus feels uncomfortable communicating through women. He's a chauvinist of his time, so he's grateful that he's communicating with John. He doesn't think that women have the brain capacity. He should run for Michigan 3rd District against John Gibbs. He can relate to Dolores because she's been a man so many times in past lives that she still has that energy about her. Nostradamus shows John the Antichrist's horoscope. And according to this, he was born in February of 62. His sun is in the first house. He has Aquarius ascending. He's a very important person who uses his power for all the wrong reasons. He has great psychic abilities. At the time they're talking, he's in his mid-20s with a dark mustache, wearing a tailored suit in the Middle East in a mansion. With a power base, is what he calls it, of Arabs on low cushions around a huge brass table on which there is coffee and finger foods. There's a big park outside the windows with palm trees and a fountain pool. It's a pool, but it's for a fountain. And Nostradamus lets him know he's in Egypt, and this time period is April of 87. He's very handsome. He has a magnetic light around him, but not spiritual. 7 men are giving him money to support him and make him a religious leader for Muslims with an ulterior motive in mind. They're going to use religion against the people, pawning themselves off as hyper-religious. He's smart with computers and finance. He was put forward by a very evil-looking priest who's there. I looked this guy up, and I don't know. There seems an endless number of evil-looking priests. The young Antichrist will inherit his power from the evil man when he dies. So when this evil priest dies, his negative entity is going into the Antichrist. And he's grooming the Antichrist for this. He's his uncle, as it turns out. There is a mantle of evil impregnating his soul, is how he's described. This old teacher is an evil personified. He was behind the killing of Sadat. He can see a complicated force of universe in this priest's face. And Nostradamus asks Cannon to find a male to work with when Brenda leaves. He thinks he'll be more successful that way. And he tells her that your spirit guides will show you who. Nostradamus wants to replace Brenda with a guy, and looks at his astrology. Let me see a second here. He's testing him. And when Nostradamus looks at his own astrology, it's revealed by the structure of his chart that he has a moon squaring Mars, which makes him combative with females. So this is Nostradamus we're talking about. He won't let her know what his exact birth date is. He says a little knowledge is dangerous. John, the astrologist, shares his astrological book with Nostradamus, who's really thrilled because it has undiscovered planets and knowledge they didn't have in his time. He's excited to have access, and this will help his writing. So, therefore, right there, Nostradamus did receive information from the future. He describes the Antichrist's face, and it's interesting. He says he looks a little like Pope John the 23rd. He's very educated and intelligent. I'm sorry, I skipped a line, which makes all the difference in the world. So this is not the Antichrist. This is Agnias, his opposite. This makes a whole lot more sense. He's a priest in Eastern Europe, in Prague possibly, but he's unhappy with the direction the church is going. So Agnias. He looks a little like Pope John the 23rd, very educated, intelligent, no negativity in him, very kind and loving, and sometimes worked at the Vatican when he was a priest. He is about world service. Then he describes the last pope, who was trying to stem the flow of money lost in the church and was considering new investments. He describes him as a man with a slight limp. I looked it up. Pope Francis has a slight limp. He has something to do with the finances of the church and corruption at the beginning of his career. And he's considering making a trip to Switzerland to work out money stuff. And interestingly enough, unbeknownst to them at the time, a year after this session, the Vatican announced that they had discovered a $64 million deficit having to do with something about Swiss bank accounts. John was told that it's quicker to incarnate on Earth. Quicker, like if you incarnate on Earth, you develop your soul more quickly. And lots of souls on Earth have chosen, knowing it's going to be hard, but they're willing to go through it because they know that the payoff at the end makes it worth it. He says that they're prevented from looking at their own futures, that John says Nostradamus recognized him, and he knew that John was from the 20th century. John, at this point, is the one who discovers that his magic mirror is not really glass, it's obsidian. This imam, this priest behind the Antichrist, is the evil guardian of the Antichrist. The Antichrist's parents were killed they were murdered, but he was told they died in a war. So John's all revved up about this. He's excited and he wants to work more at it, so he's willing to get in as much as he can before he leaves. Chapter 12, Nostradamus and Astrology. As I said before, sometimes guests are present at these sessions, and so they start a new session, and John is told to go between incarnations. He finds himself in a garden with a fountain, and he goes into the tapestry room, and he follows the thread to Nostradamus' study and finds Nostradamus in contemplation. And Nostradamus thanked John for the information on the other planets because he helped with his astrology. John and Dolores Cannon determine that they and Nostradamus are in a conspirative relationship, a cooperative relationship. They're sharing info. There's some timeline and astrological confusion because Nostradamus is still working between the Julian and Gregorian calendars, and there are discrepancies in his astrological book. Did we have to adjust his predictions from the Julian to the Gregorian calendars? For him, Pisces is a time before the vernal equinox, but not a specific date on any calendar. But he has a book of planetary positions that was written in before 4000 BC, and it goes forward to 6000 AD. So this book is Nostradamus' own, that he's collated from many ancient sources. For example, he says the Christmas star was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn affected by the sun that lasted for months, that all happened in Pisces, and the date of birth of Jesus is in March. There's a conjunction like this that predicts an important event periodically throughout history. And the Magi knew this because they were not kings, they were astrologers. He looks at the Antichrist's chart again, and if he's born in February with Aquarius in the first house, then he goes into all this astrological stuff, conjunctions and houses and etc. Yodes, but not a true yod, I'm delighted to say. Sextiles, and I would just rather spare me having to go through this because I have no idea what I'm talking about. And he says Pluto is very important in the Antichrist's life. That in 1995, Pluto will move into Sagittarius and cause him a lot of changes. Nostradamus did not put Neptune into the chart. He says this guy is not going to have any compassion. Okay. So the original date that they used really wasn't the date of his birth. It was the date his parents died. The evil uncle began grooming him. This uncle is a personification of the devil. He hates Israelis. When the evil priest dies, he will shed his body and put his evil spirit into the Antichrist. And suddenly the Antichrist will become that much more evil. And it'll be the influence of the planet Pluto. The evil priest is busy making money deals with the Arabs and Muslims to support their future work of the Antichrist. He's also stirring up political trouble in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And actually, his evil uncle had his parents killed and then told him that it was a war. And he was plotting already to take this child. And could be Zarqawi. I looked him up. I don't know. These evil eyes. The evil uncle is a mystery. Born in the 30s, is a Palestinian who hates Israel. He's dedicated to the black forces of the universe. He's like a negative walk-in. His only purpose is to groom the Antichrist. When the Antichrist comes to power, then there's more astrology. Nostradamus tells the planets rule what signs in his time, and there's a list of that I won't go through. It's in the book. He says we're going to find 2 new planets around 2040 that are part of another solar system with a binary star, and they kind of overlap in a Venn diagram. Their orbits overlap our orbits. They're close to the Earth, but they're overlooked. We'll be able to see them with a stronger telescope. We overlap the solar system. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are actually part of it. And until these 2 stars exploded, they were thrown into our orbit. Nostradamus knows this because he astral travels. They're not in orbit to our sun, but they're drawn to it in periodicity because they have a wider degree of arc. The binary star was older and burnt itself out. Nostradamus decided to focus on predictions after his depression when his family died. He lost faith in life for a while. And now he's telling John that he has to go, and he's reminded by Nostradamus, do not try to force another person's free will. Don't try to make me stay. It's time to go. And he tells him this is a huge, huge law of the universe. Do not coerce or inflict your will on others. It creates bad karma. So the organization that Ogmios forms will survive the worst of the troubles and will be the basis for future governments. Both Ogmios and the Antichrist have Saturn dominating in their charts. The Antichrist will use humanitarian peace movements to his own advantages, his own nefarious advantage. The Ogmios could start as a follower of the Antichrist, realize how evil he is, quit when he understands what the Antichrist is really about, is disillusioned, and doesn't want to see himself as a leader, but he's had much previous soul growth and has a strong hidden network of support. Nostradamus predicted the rise of the Antichrist in 1992. He predicted there'd be the first nuclear strike in 98, and the troubles would be really starting in 97, but not with 100% probability. I believe the timeline's been changed. Chapter 13, The Force of the Evil Priest. So Dolores said that she usually does a protection for white light when they go into these things, and this one day she forgot to do it for herself. And John goes back to Nostradamus again, and Nostradamus shows John, he's very proud of this toilet privy thing he made in his room. It's like a closet, and he shows how it works. It doesn't use water, it uses sand, soil, and he says everybody else goes outdoors to a privy, but he's special. And he offers to show them the Antichrist's youth. And John says it's really spooky that when they go to where they need to go, he and Nostradamus, the uncle, the imam, he senses that they're there and he doesn't like it. He tries to block them with a negative energy force. And it's so powerful that Cannon is actually knocked back by it. One guest that was there saw a black cloud come out and arise from John and move into the room. And John says that while they're seeing that, he's seeing the imam who's telling the Antichrist, who's a kid, getting him to chant, hate, hate, hate. So they freak out, and John goes home and says this imam guy is really evil. Nostradamus says the imam is evil incarnate and a talented psychic. He's been around for a long time. He's descended from spirits who rebelled against spiritual growth, the devil, and is a spiritual vampire. He lives on the souls of others. Nostradamus says you must stop him. He has, his spirit is a raging inferno that will consume all. Nostradamus is sobered by this event that they've had. John describes what he saw, the imam and the Antichrist practicing mind techniques in a trance. John was warned by Nostradamus to protect his dreams before he goes to sleep. And he had a strange dream after this, which I think is so interesting. He's in a glass dome, and there's a guy looking in, and the guy looking in can't see John, but John can see him through the glass. He's Arab features, and he was determined to get into the room, but he couldn't. And he feels like it's an evil entity. Pretty scary. Chapter 14, 666, The Secret of the Number of the Beast. In the next session, John finds Nostradamus crying. His godnephew has died. He's just a baby, and he had some genetic lung malfunction. Nostradamus looks in a mirror, and when he does, it looks like a thundercloud. When you look, he's looking into it, but if you look at the mirror, so as an observer, you can see it looks like a thundercloud. He sees the late 1980 election. The president will die in office in his late 50s. This is a failed prediction, a new timeline. The Antichrist is rising up. He becomes a real expert on computers, which, it's a challenge for Nostradamus to explain those. He is also an expert on manipulating religion. He manipulates a lot of religious leaders and dupes them. At first, he comes off as a savior because he makes a lot of wonderful inventions. Now, he's not the genius who does inventions also, but this guy makes a lot of inventions like computer-related hydroponic gardening, intensive farming, and he helps to feed a lot of nations. And he will be innovative, and he looks like a humanitarian, and he makes a lot of money doing this. He'll seem like a spiritual leader, and he will try to unite the world by helping poorer nations. He will ask rich nations for money to help poor nations, but will use the money for his own interests. God, is his name Donald? He'll start huge communication networks and will help others at first. This is his destiny. A vocal minority will recognize him for what he is and form an underground. Nostradamus says for us to know is to help us to recognize and to be forewarned. He kept saying it's so important. You need to know. You need to know. He will be disguised as a humanitarian and will do actual good work at first. People will not believe the resistance movement at first. He may even get the Nobel Prize. But as humanitarian success, it provides him with personal money and information about people, and he will use it later to crush the underground. 666 may be his personal code number. He's a beast in sheep clothing with a golden tongue. He'll set up computers to destroy countries' economies, and he can cut off their communication with the rest of the globe. He wants to own the globe. He will have computers with psychic-like functions that will turn on with the mind. Leaders will profit if they cooperate and they sell their souls. With no economic benefits to him, he rounds up all of those who have no economic benefits to him, the sick, the poor, the enfeebled, and begins programs of mass euthanasia. Nobody can escape because everybody is on file by this point. Hitler was his model. He learned from Hitler's mistakes. He controls this vast communication network where everybody has a number, and they speculate. Was it a tattoo? Was it some kind of chip, a laser, what? It's an invisible tattoo. You don't see it unless you have a special light. And we will be using them to shop and move around. You think about somebody from the 1500s predicting this. It's just intriguing to me that he could come up with it at all. True or not, The keepers, the others, are the guardians from all over the universe, are going to be watching closely. And here's the hard part, you guys, and this is what we have to get beyond, emotionally. Nostradamus says, look, this is a great spiritual lesson that you've volunteered for. It's a great spiritual lesson in annihilation. This will break a cosmic law, and watching that happen will be a lesson that has to be learned. The law broken will also create the reaction of bringing harmony to the universe. These events are a valuable spiritual lesson to be learned by more advanced souls, not the people of Earth. We have volunteered to be here to go through this, to provide a lesson for more advanced souls. What were we thinking? He says the drama will play itself out, and the resistance will be aware. Resistance will be made of those who can't live in this society of tattoos and computer, following people, that kind of thing. They will live as outlaws. Ogmios will unite people from many nations in a psychic warfare. The Antichrist will use his idea of linked charitable concerts from the past, remember Farm Aid and that kind of thing. He's going to use that idea around the globe to link his network of evil. Canon points out the similarities in the book of Revelation, and that's when Nostradamus says, don't get too hooked on the book of Revelation. This is a series of visions, and they don't really fall in chronological order, and they're not the end of everything the way people have interpreted them. Chapter 15, Nostradamus' house. So they actually get to see part of where he lives. There's a study with shelves and parchment scrolls, quills, a tripod bowl for fire, which is describing a Roman brazier, a long table with carved chest at the end on the floor, the mirror, and they can see into another room. It's like an apothecary. It's where he does his medical stuff. He has a bunch of herbs and treats patients in there, and they're not supposed to go in there. The window is actually covered in a skin made of round pieces sewn together. It's called a marrow. It lets in the light, but you can't see out. His privy, his closet, toilet closet. And there's straw on the floor, and he explains that's used for insulation. It keeps his feet warm. And there's a fireplace. And when it gets really cold, he uses the flames in the brazier, but he also uses it for trance work. He's wearing mittens with no fingers. The walls are of stucco with pegs to hang clothes. He has an elaborate multi-candle candelabra that's not always lit. There are benches for students to sit. He has spiritual blocks that keep spirits out of the rest of the house. He does these spiritual blocks that isolate that all. Nostradamus tells John that in the trunk he has all kinds of old antiquities that people have brought him, and that he's found, like coins and a sword found in a field, an area where Romans had been in France. He told John that he lived far from Paris, and actually it turns out to be true that he lives in Provence, near Italy and the Mediterranean Sea, an area heavily occupied by Rome in the 2nd century BC. It was a province of Rome called Provincia Romana, therefore Provence. So now we're on section 2, the translation. Chapter 16, the translation begins through John. So she first used John just to read the astrological lines. And the beginning of the destruction of the church is with difficulties in the 1990s. And you have to wonder, all these sex abuse cases? The Pope is assassinated, and nobody will realize it because it'll be poison, which is absorbed into the bones and attacks the central nervous system, so it'll look like he had a stroke or a heart attack. The British monarch will be murdered by people who don't like him specifically. He will be assassinated by the IRA or a group of similar motives after 2000, so it'll be in this century. And he says he's referring to Charles. This is Nostradamus predicting, just the book. His death will cause a division between Ireland and England. And England will once again go after Catholic churches. And this could be around the year 2014. But Charles wasn't king. And I wonder how that threw the timeline off. There'll be a war between Turkey and Greece. Greece asks for help from Italy and the United States and others. Turkey might even use limited nukes and sophisticated technology that it gets from Russia. So Russia supports Turkey. Russia did support Turkey in Syria. So with using astrology, which I'm not going to go into, he says the U.S. stays neutral. It's a short war. There's a fire in Athens, and the Parthenon is not hurt this time. That's dire. Cannon thinks that this is possibly related to the Gulf War. I don't know. It's like he said, the Middle East is a mess. It's really hard to figure out what's going on, and even he had trouble with it. He does do a prediction about World War II and Japan, and that the Soviets will be in China, and that China will go to communism. He calls it communalism in the 1940s. And this actually, all that he predicted in that particular thing came true. And then Brenda and John have interpreted the same lines, and she's comparing them. So Brenda says these lines are talking about the attack of London that happens by the IRA. There'll be a fire. They describe the fall of the church and the killing of priests during the Reformation. Remember, not chronological. The Antichrist tries to bomb London. Christians will be persecuting Christians. The poor will fight the rich, and the rich will die. Space stations will be set up at L5, and it turns out nobody knew what that meant. It's where gravity between the Earth and the Moon is equal. It's that spot. Travelers are not prepared for the unexpected aspects of the environment up there, like deep vacuum conditions in space. They're warned by a computer oracle. So they're talking about AI here quite a bit. Also, astronomical observatories will be set up on the lunar surface with US, Russia, and England working together. Technology exists now, but the pressures that are being created by the cabal prevent it. And when the Antichrist and the cabal are gone, now the cabal is what she talks about, I guess you'd call it the Illuminati, basically. The idea of a handful of ultra-rich global banking power families that are involved in global finances and global leadership. And familially. John says these space things are around 2000 to 2100, the year 2000 to 2100. And countries will unite in a world government with joint exploration and maybe to planets that we don't see that are on the other side of the moon. There'll be contact with the ETs and they'll work with them in the 21st and the 22nd century after the Antichrist. There'll be the loss of 2 stars, but does he mean space stations? And they will get help from another galaxy. Nostradamus also sees communication with others in the future. The future. And it's kind of like being a time traveler. Canon is told it's that what she's doing is helping, that it's necessary, that he has an urge from somewhere that he must do this and she must cooperate, and that it's best for all concerned to be doing this process of the book. Chapter 17, the fate of the Antichrist and the world. What was the fate of the Antichrist? So, there's this discussion about all these wars and the Antichrist is taking over and there's one world government that's evil based on this Antichrist guy. But then something happens. That something is a shift, a polar shift. At the beginning of the 21st century, we're running out of time. And Nostradamus says, sorry to tell you, but many will leave the planet all at the same time. The Antichrist is alive, but he dies in the Earth shift. And basically you're talking about the Earth turning so that the poles are different, and it displaces the water on the planet and leads to earthquakes and volcanoes, which land sinks and land rises. And so it's a mess. The Antichrist is swept away in a tidal wave because the planet rebels against him. The Antichrist thought he controlled the planet, but it's controlled by the spirit world. The Antichrist will be in the Alpine area of Italy and Switzerland. It won't save him. His followers will try to go on, but humanity puts down its weapons after the polar shift. They have no time for it. Europe will be under the control of the Antichrist until the shift. U.S. will not, but after the shift, the United States becomes mostly islands. Most of India and the Caribbean will be gone. The interior of Russia and China will be a large land mass, bigger than you would call an island, but not anything remotely what it is right now. Europe will be an island from Spain to Norway, nothing but islands. England will be a much smaller island. The Mediterranean will be gone. And all the ocean will go to the south. Poland will be gone. Greece will still be islands, but they'll be different islands. Most of Africa will be gone. Antarctica and Australia will be connected. I tell you, Australia is the place to be. There'll be new land in the oceans. The north will be tropical. There will be no polar ice caps for a very long time. There'll be fewer cold climate areas. Everything will be moderate or tropical. It'll take 10 to 15 years for things to settle down, and we'll return to a technological society because the government will be somewhat prepared, and a lot of our technology will be off planet, in satellites. And also, he says, the guardians are watching the planet. And eventually, new cities will be built that'll be nicer and cleaner. There'll be no cars. There won't be nearly as many people, a fraction of the people. The Antichrist tried to control the earth's spirit and is brought down by her destruction. I just think it's fair. Chapter 18, the injured child. This is not chronological. Okay. Nostradamus sees into the future and sees speedway car races, and he says this is like the Colosseum. Money is spent in sports arenas. It's nuts. He can't believe it, and he relates it to gladiatorial combat and even more ancient. There'll be a death knell for religions. The crucifix will be considered a horrific, barbaric, and pagan negative sign because it represents murder and death and suffering. And as George Carlin said, if Jesus were alive today, everybody would be wearing a little electric chair around their necks. So Nostradamus is equating religion. He explicitly says he's equating religion with mass entertainment and extermination. He says the last pope will have some sort of hardly noticeable curve in his spine, but you will see a small limp. He will align himself with materialism. A shot aimed at the Pope will hit a world leader, a king or a president, some high government dignitary. There will be big famine from hail killing crops. Now this is all around the time of the beginning of the Antichrist. And I put this in capital letters because they don't emphasize this enough, and I think it's important. The world weather changes in our lifetime before the Antichrist, and he's going to use climate change as a way to control people. There'll be technological advances. He describes lasers and laser energy. He didn't have the words for it, but that's what they figured out he was talking about. He says, more importantly, there will be spiritual advances in the human race. That we are going to begin to try to understand animals. Now, from his point of view, people were horrible to animals. And he's looking forward and he's seeing people trying to teach animals sign language. That has happened. And he talks about the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, the site of the original Temple of Solomon, now shared by all three major Mosaic religions and fought over constantly. The Dome of the Rock will be destroyed in an earthquake, and the Jewish religion is going to rush in and want to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. And the Muslims are going to freak out, and they're going to desecrate it by going to the site of this new, fully built Temple of Solomon, and they're going to commit ritual suicide and desecrate it. They'll dress as French tourists, French Jewish tourists. This will be a war cry that will signal the advance of the Antichrist, a beacon of the Arab world. Nostradamus mentions the Albigensian rebellion against Rome. They were persecuted by the Church of Rome, the Catholic Church. They were persecuted by the church. It was led by Count Toulouse, and he mentions all these words. American Jews are right now, today, financing a new temple in Jerusalem. Lyon will be destroyed by the quake. The Pope will be from Lyon. And then the session is ended, and John describes a group of people rush in unannounced and catch Nostradamus in this trance with a child who's been run over by a cart and his foot is dangling and they need surgery, and so that happens. So now I'm going to stop. We're at chapter 19, so this is the end of video 2. And when I come back, we'll start video number 3. Thank you very much for watching Slung Foil.